is up? I'm Gabe, and this is JC, and we're here from the channel Scold Philosophy. And today we're going to be reviewing Shannon Q's video of her argument against the existence of the soul.
Yeah, it should be interesting because she kind of she's kind of hailed as the neuroscience and psychology expert among your popular YouTube atheists, and so it'll be interesting to actually hear what she brings up.
Yeah, oh, by the way, our occupation is we're both high school students.
Yeah, and we've read and talked a lot on the subject. That's about all. So if you're looking for someone with credentials professionally, currently, I would go somewhere else. But if you're just here to kind of hear our opinion, then guess you could stick around.
That's not to say we're wrong.
Well, I mean, we could be wrong. And I'm fine with being wrong. It's just, I don't think credentials, not having professional credentials makes us wrong.
I'd rather deal with the actual statements and the arguments than just deal with somebody and be like, "Oh, you don't have a PhD, so."
All right, let's watch this.
About to begin, but don't forget to subscribe, or else don't make me turn this website around.
All right, we'll go to Brenda. We'll talk to Brenda next. Hi, Brenda. I'm excited to talk about this one. I'm good. How are you?
You're excited to talk about it? I thought I was
yes,
being
I am. Oh, hi. I know who you are. Hi, Brenda.
Okay, so
I
I was
recognize your voice.
nobody knows who I am.
Okay.
So I was just wondering about what your take on consciousness was. There are only a few positions that we as non-supernaturalist believers can take.
Mm-hmm.
What I really, really hate right there, this is my pet peeve, is the supernaturalist believers. Like, that makes me upset. Because
there were idealist atheists.
It paints certain belief systems as just like total fairy tale, and it paints the soul, or like what they call the soul, as like just a fairy tale too. And so they're going to use the term supernatural in here a lot, and that's where I really get upset, is because I just don't think it works. It's kind of a straw man. It's like, well, because it's supposedly what we would consider supernatural and we don't believe in it, then we have to reject it. And so that's kind of like what I don't like. And they're going to do that a lot.
The other thing is, when you mentioned to me earlier this week that you're reading a book by an atheist who thinks that consciousness can be suspended past death.
Yeah, so I was reading... There's that book, and there's David Chalmers, who's an agnostic, and he's a dualist. And
so it's not like it's just believers who hold those positions.
Right. I know some of my friends who are atheists are dualists. So they're going to use the term to refer to the soul here as supernatural a lot. And I don't think that's fair. I think it's kind of painting the wrong picture.
Yeah, especially when they put it in a negative connotation like that.
We're not supernatural believers. Well, when you look at a lot of atheists, they're actually New Age or spiritual people. Most atheists are not naturalists, or what we consider like naturalists, right? Most are.
Or most are like, they don't think miracles happen, but they like you'll see them talk about like this, like the soul, or they'll talk about the spirit, and they'll talk about like all the New Age stuff about like the meditating and stuff like that.
Yeah, they'll talk about astrology. A lot of atheists are into astrology. Like, they're just kind of painting this weird picture right off the bat.
They're also into those, what are they called, those signs? Like, it tells you like what your name is or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's astrology is what they're...
Yeah.
I don't think you believe in a soul. And so
No.
I'm just wondering what you take as your explanation for the phenomenon we call consciousness.
Are you asking Katie, myself, or both?
Either or both.
Okay. Well, I have a position on this also. So I believe it to be an emergent property of the physical components of the brain. And Insta, I've been reading, I can't remember her name right now. Oh my gosh, can't remember her name right now, and it really sucks. I've been reading. Oh, I can't remember her name. Anyways, she's British, and she used to be a parapsychologist, and now she's.
So she's some type of like emergentist, in the realm of like physicalism, right? So she believes that to lay it out easier, so you understand when someone comes to watch this, so they understand what she's actually referring to. She believes that the phenomenon and the phenomenal experiences and the subjective self and the first person view of us as humans arises, or well, I guess arises is the wrong word. It emerges from the physical properties, physical substrate of the brain, and the neurons and the pathways and everything. And so that, to kind of paint it out a little bit more clearly, that's what she's referring to. But yeah, we can continue.
Well,
She's kind of a.
I do have one issue. I mean, one thing I'd talk about physicalism, and this is just off of the top of my head, kind of. My issue with physicalism is that the world around us, in order for it to like and this is getting into that weird like quantum emergence stuff, but basically, in order for the world around you to actually like, appear, there has to be a conscious observer. But in her view, there would already have to be a world like. There'd already have to be something physical there to bring about physical minds, but in order for the physical reality to exist in the way it does, there have to be physical minds in order to create conscious observers that would be able to observe the world around them. At least that's my understanding of how that quantum consciousness thing works.
Yeah, it's weird. Now, I don't really like to get into quantum consciousness because there's so many interpretations of quantum mechanics that you have to stick to and hold to one. And so I don't really like that, but yeah, I can see what you're saying.
Philosopher / psychologist, neuroscientist. And
I think she's talking, I could be wrong, I think she's talking about Patricia Churchland.
Was she British?
Yeah. I think that's who she's talking about. And she is, I think she's an eliminativist, but I could be wrong. She may not be that, but I believe she doesn't believe like qualia and stuff like that exists. I think that's who she's referring to.
And she has interesting theories about consciousness itself being a form of present illusion, which I think is.
Oh, yeah. So I think she's probably talking about Patricia Churchland there. Her idea is that qualia, as we think about it, so when I'm talking about qualia, I'm talking about like our subjective experiences. That doesn't exist. And our brain creates the illusion of subjective and phenomenal experiences. That's what she's referring to there, where she talks about like, it's like a type of illusionism. But yeah, that's kind of what she's referring to there.
That's a very odd belief.
Really interesting to look at. I may get. Is it okay if I get kind of technical here for a second? I suppose it probably is fine. So, whenever we're having a conscious experience, we're essentially measuring that current experience against previous ones to make predictions. So we're creating predictive models. And in order to create those predictive models, we need to access previous experiences and weigh them against our the emotion centers of the brain. We need to weigh them against, memories of physical and other sensory experiences.
Actually, I'll let her finish before I make
in the brain. And in order to do that, we have to kind of do this sort of retroactive access. Now, that retroactive access adds a component to our current conscious experience of previous conscious experiences. And because we're adding the component of previous conscious experiences to the current one, there's this sort of illusion of concurrence, that like of sameness of self through that activity that we consistently do, to the point that the self itself could potentially be an illusion
Okay, I have an issue there. She talks about how, like, she's talking about perception. She's talking about when we take in different light and different sounds and the stimuli that our brain receives and processes through different channels and neurons and stuff like that, right? That is not consciousness. When a philosopher talks about consciousness, that's not what they're referring to.
You're talking about the experiences before that.
They're talking about, so for example, if you took a blind and a deaf person who can't feel, right? They would
got no feeling.
Yeah, they would still probably have a sense of self, have a sense of subjective experience, have a sense of what it means to be whatever their name is, what it means to live life, what it means to be human, I guess. Right? So what she's referring to there doesn't really relate to when a philosopher talks about consciousness. What she's referring to is what David Chalmers in his book The Conscious Mind refers to as like the easy problems. So, consciousness is obviously in correlation with these actions and these happenings and these physical properties, but it is a matter of, are they emergent from them? Are they a product of them? And from what you're saying here, I don't think it follows they are. It follows that there are correlations with them, but it does not follow it's a product of it. So that's kind of what I wanted to point out there, is that she's not referring to what consciousness, when I refer to it, is actually. She's just referring to different types of biological functioning that our brain.
I think it's worth noting that there's also different kinds of consciousness. Like what you said, the philosopher's consciousness is like people who can't see, can't taste, can't hear. They don't have any sensory experience, are still conscious that they exist. They're conscious of other like self-evident facts of things like that. But there's another type of consciousness, is like the one that you and I are experiencing right now, where I'm conscious and I'm talking to you and I can see everything around me, and that's another type of conscious. The interesting thing about that type of consciousness, though, is from my understanding, there are different parts in your brain that produce, like if I'm going to see this red blanket over here, there's one that shows one part of my brain processes the shape of the blanket. The other part of my brain processes the color, and then the next part of my brain processes the area surrounding it. An interesting thing, though, is that there's no experiments done that can show how these things can mix together properly in your brain. Like, they shouldn't mix properly, but they do. And they mix together. The chemicals that those parts of your brain produce mix quite well. There's no explanation for that. That's as far as my understanding goes, though. So don't, like, if it turns out that I'm wrong, please don't go that I'm dishonest.
Yeah, and I would point out another thing, and this is a big topic in philosophy of the mind, is the logical possibility of biological zombies. Now, when I refer to a zombie, I'm referring to a subject that has no subjective experience, has no qualia, has no certain attributes that when we refer to consciousness, we're referring to. Basically, it would be like, if it's a logical possibility. So basically what it means is that if we're going by her definition and her evidence for consciousness arising from the brain, then we should expect us to not have consciousness at all. We should expect consciousness to kind of be a type of be just kind of these blank meat robots, as a lot of apologists say, although I don't think they're always using it in the right context. Meat robots that kind of stare off into space and have no really quote unquote awareness of what is actually there, and awareness of what they are, awareness of their existence, right? So if it's logically conceivable those can exist, then on a type of materialism like she's talking about, it would make more sense that consciousness wouldn't exist at all, because consciousness, we have no way of knowing how consciousness arises from the brain, right? She's
Yeah.
making what she would consider like a logical interference. So she's like,
Hold on.
well, based on what we know now, it would be logical to assume that consciousness emerges from
I'm
the physical.
trying to find that statement that I posted on my Instagram the other day, the David Bentley Hart quote, because I think that he makes an interesting point about one's first conscious experience being so extravagant and so really the only word to describe it is beautiful, that no matter how you explain it physically, it's never going to be satisfactory to most people, because the conscious experience, especially your first moment that you wake up and you see, I don't know what infants normally see when they wake up, because usually you can't remember what you see, but when you first begin to realize who you are, that's what I would say is like your first conscious experience. So it's not just you seeing things around you, it's you realizing, hey, that you're a human, and you realize who you are and what your personal identity is.
Yeah, I'm here. I exist. I'm in this physical world. I'm in this, enigma of reality type thing. So yeah, I think we need to get going again. But again, her point that she just made is not really at all a subsequent answer to what would be what we call the hard problem of consciousness.
Manifests itself into our current conscious experience by way of us requiring to have access to previous experiences, attributing them to the physical us, and seeing a continuity, even though when you actually act
right there, that's a perfect example. She just said attributing them to us. There's no us in consciousness, right? So if we have no consciousness, there is no us. There's no sense of subjectivity. Right there, she kind of very subtly contradicted herself there, right? To make consciousness, we can have consciousness, like she's basically saying consciousness is attributing itself to us to then have consciousness. That's what I'm getting from there. I could be misunderstanding. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that didn't really make any sense, what she was saying there.
Analyze things like memories. There are inconsistencies there, and personalities change over time along with the physical attributes of the body. So that sense of self may be like a full-on conscious sensory illusion. And I think that that's really interesting. I'm not sure if I buy into it yet, but a lot of that kind of made some sense to me. So I don't know. I could ramble on for hours about this stuff. But anyway, hi. Yeah, sorry, Katie, what do you think? I'll shut up for a sec.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what I think. Obviously, I agree with all the experts. No, I think that, the idea that it's something that's emerged as like, but it's like it's evolved, but it's also just kind of emerged as a result of our physical brain structure. Makes the most sense to me.
Well, also, I just kind of want to point out, they talk about emerging, it emerged. But somebody like David Chalmers believed consciousness emerges too from physical properties. But he's a dualist, right? So he believes that we have a soul in the sense that it's a separate entity from our physical brain, right? But
that's what that's what every dualist would have no problem with emergent consciousness.
Yeah, and here's the thing: as idealists, we don't have an issue with emergent. Like, consciousness to us, it could still be emergent. It could still be like, because we think that consciousness, well, I'm not going to go into explaining it, but what she's talking about here isn't necessarily incompatible with the soul, or at least certain forms. Like, there are certain forms of dualism that wouldn't work, but there are also forms that could work. Because, for example, David Chalmers, he's a dualist, but he's going to agree with what they're saying here, that consciousness emerges from physical properties of the brain. So again, I don't think they're really understanding what is happening here, because they're just kind of like, consciousness emerges, which even I could agree with. I think I do agree with it to a certain extent. But that doesn't change my position to a straight physicalist, right? I think I'm trying to dumb this down because I don't want to get too complicated, but it's not incompatible with what they're trying to say, that since consciousness is emergent from the physical brain, then therefore no quote unquote soul exists. But I don't see them as incompatible here. I think you could have a soul that's emergent from the brain. So I guess that would be a simpler version of putting it.
So yeah, it's not necessarily like an actual thing. It's just like kind of a result of what we have. I don't know if that really makes any sense.
I feel like I could just keep talking through. So if you look at even the past, just a simple sensory experience. Oh, sorry, Brenda. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. I prat a lot about this all the time. Go ahead, Brenda.
Well, I was wondering how you dealt. I was wondering then why you reject, because the problem with emergentism is it kind of makes it epiphenomenal, which makes it a question about why we have it at all. Why would we have it at all? Why would you choose what you currently believe in favor of, say, a limit of materialism, which is consciousness simply is eliminated, or a more dualist? There are dualist, non-theistic beliefs where consciousness is simply an aspect of reality that is nevertheless real but fundamental.
Right. Brenda just pointed that out perfectly. What I was trying to say is you get into epiphenomenalism, and it's what if there's a logical possibility of just non-conscious zombies, then some type of epiphenomenalism is just sort of, it gets into a lot of why, or it's just the issue is that it just doesn't really make sense then, right? So Brenda just pointed out perfectly. I think eliminative materialism is pretty cool. I find it to be pretty fun to think about. I don't agree with it, but I think it's pretty fun to think about, and I think it's somewhat logical. But again, I think Brenda is pointing pointing out what I just said, that you could have an emergent soul from the brain.
And why would you reject those alternatives, which I have heard from other people? They don't seem to. They're not appealing to souls and to gods and to spirits and things like that. But they are. They do seem to be viable alternatives to explain phenomenal consciousness. I'm talking about phenomenal consciousness, not accessible consciousness.
So I'm not a philosopher, so I could explain.
Right there. No offense to Shannon Q whatsoever. I think she's a very smart person. But you could tell she kind of realized where she went wrong. Because she kind of thought through and was like, oh yeah, what I just said doesn't totally make sense. It doesn't solve the problem at all. Right? And so
she wasn't talking about the hard problem of consciousness. She was just talking about I think it's what Brenda called the accessible problem of consciousness, where it's just trying to explain
she's talking about accessible consciousness and the easy problem of consciousness. not really.
The hard problem is what you talked about earlier about, even someone who is blind has no sensory experiences about reality around them is still conscious in the sense that philosophers talk about it.
Right. So I think she kind of, no offense to her at all whatsoever. I think both of the people, all three of the people in here, are super smart people. But I think Shannon kind of realized where she went wrong, and she's going to try and kind of backtrack on that.
Yeah, this isn't the atheist experience.
Some of where I came to, or why I came to the position I have, and what that might be, and then you can subscribe to it, whichever.
Right. So you see where she backtracked, where she said, "Well, I can explain to you what I sort of believe. Then you can just tell me, what it's called." Right. She's kind of backtracking into it. So it's very likely, honestly, I could likely see her being some type of emergent dualist.
Yeah, because the problem that she raised earlier wouldn't be an issue at all.
Right. And correlation doesn't equal causation. So just because there's correlations between consciousness and, just basic biological entities in terms of she's going to bring up, what do you call it? Like some type of ATP and stuff like that, basically like just basic brain functions. There are going to be correlations, but it doesn't mean that's causation. That's just what I would point out.
Whichever label you feel.
Hold on. Is she a? Let me find it. Is she a non-reductive physicalist? Non-reductive physicalist?
Possibly. I'm not 100% sure because she kind of wavers back and forth.
All I know is physicalism is the belief that that consciousness can be purely explained in materialist terms. I think.
Right. We'll continue, and I'll look up something.
Feel fits, and I'm fine with that. so one of the things, to me, it's not, why do you reject the position that you've never heard of?
Right. So she'd actually, I think you're correct. She would be some type of non-reductive physicalist. In terms of she believes that mental properties are in a separate ontological class to physical properties. I think she would, what she sounds like right now is some type of non-reductive physicalist, to me at least.
My issue is that I don't see where there could be a non-corporeal component of us, so that eliminates any sort of dualism as I understand it, or
never mind.
Dualism for sure, because the mechanisms for interaction wouldn't make any sort of sense. For example, if you're looking at neuroscience, which is where
it wouldn't be substance
okay,
dualism.
Go ahead, and then I will
be property dualism.
Yeah, she would eliminate substance dualism, something like J.P. Moreland, but she's not eliminating property dualism, right? And so when she's talking about the quote unquote soul here, she goes on rants on. She goes through other. She has other streams where she talks about the soul, right? Why I picked this video to go through is because this sums up her arguments against the soul very well, because I watched all of her other streams, right? And so I picked this one to kind of sum it up. She makes the exact same arguments, just more repetitively. And she's not getting rid of the soul. She's getting rid of substance dualism version of the soul, but not the soul itself. Not a David Chalmers version of consciousness.
And she's not gonna. I don't think she's gonna deal with people like J.P. Moreland's argument for the substance dualism, and she hasn't even touched idealism.
Well, I don't think she fully I don't think she would fully understand idealism.
Yeah, people misunderstand it as people think that matter is replaced with mind.
Well, there's certain in idealism there is certain beliefs that everything is purely mental. I don't fully hold to that. I think there's matter and mental, but I think mental is the basis of the matter type thing. But
Yeah, that's what I would say.
that's a different idealism is cringe. No, it's not. How dare you? It's the best theory out there.
Oh no, man, physicalism.
I don't mind physicalism. Like, I have nothing against physicalism. It's just, to me personally, it doesn't make sense right now.
Well,
Like,
I have an issue with physicalism.
well, yeah. I mean, I guess you could. Maybe you have an issue. I have nothing. Like, something like eliminative materialism is super cool to me.
Yeah, that's because you're not. Never mind.
Yeah, no, is super cool to me. I have nothing against physicalism. It's just I don't think it's necessarily true.
Oh, by the way,
whatever.
you should get the book Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview, because that's got like about like 200 pages on the mind-body problem.
Yeah, the mind-body problem is super interesting to me. And why I'm super enthused with this video and why I was like begging Gabe to let me do it and be able to schedule it is because philosophy of the mind and consciousness and that stuff is very cool to me. And so that's kind of why I was really hoping to get this video done.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's continue.
I'm not philosophical in nature. So the correction is noted, but I don't even know if it's correct because I'm not philosophical in nature. But I will give you what I believe and why I believe it. So when you look at any sort of conscious property, there's a neurological component to it, like or neuroanatomical component to it. There just has to be any sort of.
Right. Well, I would disagree with that. This is one of the only parts of the video I actually disagree with her on. I disagree with that. I don't think there has to be. Like I said,
that's kind of she's kind of assuming her own conclusion by saying that there has to be some sort of neurological explanation.
Right. Well, she's saying like there has to be some type of like anatomical correlation, like consciousness. You know, it's weird, but yeah, that's one of the things that I wouldn't agree with.
Well, that's kind of like some of the people who say that any explanation we find in the natural world about natural phenomena would have to be purely naturalistic and materialistic. But that's to me, that's blatantly false because it's confusing two types of explanation. But you get my point. It's the same principle, because if she's saying that it has to be some way neurologically connected, then she's already kind of ruling out dualism in a sense. So she's already argued against dualism, but then she can't really have an argument against dualism because she's already assuming her conclusion that dualism is false by saying that there has to be some sort of neurological connection.
It's kind of a circular argument, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Is epistemology considered part of philosophy of the mind? Epistemology is integrated into philosophy of the mind, so you can use that. Different philosophers in the mind will use epistemology, but it's also a separate study. So it's not like philosophy of the mind and epistemology are in their same are in the same realm. Like you can study philosophy of the mind without studying epistemology, but
epistemology is somewhere closer to the realm of like people who study ontology. It's similar to that, but it's also different because street epistemology and stuff like that is pretty much what epistemology actually is. And then there's reformed epistemology with Alvin Planting and stuff like that.
Yeah, so it can be integrated, but it's not like they're buddy type things.
Yeah.
Experience that we have that's integrated into what we would call a self, all of that is reliant on previous experiences, sensory experiences for the most part,
that's the question though. Is my sense of being human reliant on the sensory perceptions around me. Does my concept of my existence and my phenomenal experience reliant on the past perceptions? I don't think so. I think our past perceptions, data, and information we gather can shape our subjective self and maybe change our subjective self, but I don't think it is past experiences and stuff like that have to be there for consciousness to arise. For example, like I brought up at the beginning, a deaf, blind person who can't feel anything, who possibly can't even smell, right? They're still going to have a sense of existence. So I don't think that's true either. I think you just have to kind of you kind of have to separate the two, and she's trying to integrate them, but it's not working at all.
Or interaction-based experiences, which I would argue are sensory experiences as well. Now, in order to enact any sort of behavior, so in order to do anything, or even have the motivation to do anything, we require our neuroanatomy to change, physically change. Now, it's difficult to see on the macro scale, but when you look on the micro scale, when you look at the actual sodium ion and potassium channels in the brain that are required to open and close in order to have the action potentials required for us to feel anything or have any sort of experience, I don't see how there could be a way for something immaterial to change the physical constitution of those soma, like that cell body, to change the amount of sodium ions inside or outside of that neuron to...
Well, I'd point out two things. Number one, this is just a challenge to certain types of like Cartesian dualism and stuff like that. This is not a challenge to the soul in the way different people describe it as, right? This is just like a challenge to like Cartesian dualism. Second, it doesn't have to. Even on Cartesian dualism, the soul doesn't have to regulate the ions and everything in brain channels. Like I would just, even as a Cartesian dualist, I just deny that. I'd be like, no, it doesn't have to. That's not the point of the soul. The point of the soul is not to regulate that stuff. The point of the soul is to give us subjective experiences. So this is just a weird argument right here. And this is why I think a lot of physicalist arguments fail, because they do this. Now,
they
not
don't
all
understand what they don't even. I mean, it's not. I don't think that they're like lacking in like knowledge or anything, but I think that it's a basic failure to understand the opposition. So it would be
Right.
like me arguing that all. It would be like an atheist arguing against the existence of God by saying that that the universe had. It's like that. It's like Stephen Hawking says in his thing. It's the grand design, or maybe it's a brief history of time. I can't remember, but he says that since the universe begins to exist, then there's no need for God because time begins, and so there's no way for God to act on the. There's no time for God to create anything. The issue is it's a confusion of what theists have generally said about God and his relation to time. So you get what I'm saying? It's like cosmologists commentating on philosophy and theology, right? It's not that they're not smart people. It's just that they don't properly understand what the other side is talking about before they try and comment on it.
I have no doubt Shannon Q is knowledgeable in psychology at all. I just don't think she's fully grasping what is actually being asked here, because she's kind of throwing out like, how does the immaterial soul interact with our physical brain, right? That is an issue for dualism. But then she randomly adds on this piece where it has to like change and manage the ions and everything in brain channels. But a dualist isn't going to agree with that. They're going to agree that the soul has some type of interaction with the physical, be able to give us the experience. but they don't believe the soul regulates regular brain functions.
Yeah, this is the most interesting argument I've seen against dualism is, hear me out, put forward, and this is just recently this week though, because this is my first time really looking into the philosophy of mind, but the most interesting argument against dualism I've heard was from Arn Ra. Yeah, that shows the limitations of my research right now, but he basically talks about like these studies where like people do drugs and it like changes their personality forever, and he somehow jumps from that to the soul doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily true, but again, like, yeah, there would be a strong argument against like Cartesian dualism or some type of weird substance dualism, right?
The property dualism and idealism would have no problems with that.
Yeah, she's randomly just like jumping between philosophy and neuroscience and like trying to make them combine, but they're not working whatsoever. It's not happening. It's not helping her case.
Yeah, it's definitely not like what J.P. Moreland does.
Yeah. So,
well, I don't think you've read J.P. Moreland's thing, though, have you?
I have. I read his section in the Blackwell and read his section and read a bunch of his papers online.
To get mitochondria to produce enough ATP in order to open up the channels so that those ions can travel back and forth across the cell body to create the action potential required to fire that neuron for us to even have this conversation about why there is a self. All of those things are required to happen, right? If those things didn't happen, we couldn't have this conversation. If those things didn't happen, I couldn't have an experience to even debate.
She's confusing things. If those didn't happen, you couldn't talk. If those didn't happen, you couldn't necessarily.
If those didn't happen, you wouldn't be there.
Yeah, like this is not an issue for the soul.
I think you could. I think what she's trying to say is that there's a fundamental physical action or physical occurrence that needs to happen before you can even have these like conversations. But if that's what her point, I don't see why somebody couldn't point out, well, there's a action that goes on in the mental state or like, the mind or the soul that goes on right prior to those physical states, and that's what causes those physical. You see what I'm saying? I don't see why that would be an issue.
Yeah, I don't understand this. She's not ruling out the soul at all. She's ruling out a version of the soul, but she's not ruling out the soul in total.
So those things are the only requirement for this sense of self, this conscious experience.
No, it's not at all. No. That was, I'm not even sure where she got that from.
And that Bill Maher, we should like edit this video and like put that Bill Maher like thing where he just goes, no.
Yeah,
he's like just like the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm just very confused. Where is she getting this?
We should put the elephant philosophy quote where it's like nonsense, and then somebody says something else, and then he just goes more nonsense.
Yeah,
it's Pelagia.
Where? How does this even make sense, right? What she just said.
Well, what does it matter? We're just a bunch of dishonest teenagers.
That's true. I mean, I don't doubt that she's smart at all. I don't doubt either of them are smart. I know Brenda's brilliant, but no, I don't doubt either of them are smart.
What's this show?
I think it's like the line.
At least it's not. It's got more quality than most of the call-in shows, so we got to give them that. It's got more. It's definitely better than Tang and the atheist experience. She actually has some at least a relevant idea of what she's discussing. Yeah.
I mean, at least she knows like some of the science behind it. She's just not attributing this to the way she needs to. Like, she just needed to bring up how the soul on certain versions, can't interact with the physical brain, right? But still, even if she brought that up, it wouldn't eliminate the soul. So
It would just eliminate some models of the. Again,
yeah,
it's like the Hawking-Mladenov problem. That only eliminates certain views of theism. It doesn't eliminate all of them, and that's the error that I think that she's making, and I think that's the error that Hawking made.
oh
Is
yeah. So
that
an example would be like the problem of evil. Let's say the problem of evil is what she's bringing up now for right. Compare the problem of evil. Okay, the problem of evil disproves some type of classical theism.
but it
You
doesn't
are well,
disprove
at least you could argue it disproves some type of classical theism, but
which
it does not disprove a God totally, right? So
it's only an issue for like it would not have the problem of evil wouldn't affect skeptical theists at all, really.
well, I mean, there's arguments against skeptical theism that I think
Yeah,
are
but
pretty,
But
but
you get what I'm saying. Like certain models of even like personal, like a personal God, would not be affected by it. Like Calvinism, I don't think Calvinism would have an issue with the problem of evil.
I actually argue Calvinism has a bigger issue with problem of evil than most values, but
Yeah,
that's
because the predestination thing.
yeah, he predestined us to all be evil, immoral creatures that he must save, but he predestined, like, yeah. I would argue that Calvinism,
Yeah, well, Calvinism is Calvinists are Chads, right? We aren't Armenians.
yeah, no, yeah, but that's basically what she's doing. She thinks this is an argument against it's an all-encompassing argument against the soul when
But
it's
it's
not.
only against like certain views of it. Like
Yeah.
I think it would be an issue for J.P. Moreland's view, but he's got his own like stuff that he's got arguments for that would be.
He goes over a video by J.P. Moreland and over a video by Eric Hernandez in some of her streams. And she did a very good job of kind of pointing out the issues with their view. But she wouldn't be able to do this to David Chalmers. He'd be like, I accept this. This is fine. But I still believe in a dualist consciousness.
Ontology. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who was the other guy?
Which
the guy
guy?
that you're having come on the show in a couple weeks.
Bernardo Castro?
Yeah. I don't
He's an
think
idealist.
Yeah, so this wouldn't affect him at all.
Well, he actually accepts this. He thinks that these physical correlations and perception and everything is basically a physical version of what we like. It's hard to explain, but he'd accept this. He's fine with this, right? So this is
he
just a
is he a
weird.
Christian?
No, I think he's. I don't think he's non-theist. I think he's an agnostic. I don't remember.
Yeah, that's what's weird. People like this is where philosophy of mind gets me weird. But that somebody could believe that the mind is fundamental, but then they're an atheist. It's like
He may be a type of theist. I don't. He's not Christian. I don't believe. But yeah.
So I don't, and there can't be any sort of outside influence that takes microscopic like ion tweezers and moves them back and forth across the cell body in order to get action potentials in certain neurons and not others. That seems trivially silly to me.
Yeah, it's trivially silly because it's a dumb question. It's like that doesn't even do anything against J.P. Moreland. He's just gonna deny that she's thinking the soul is some type of like regulation factor.
she's thinking the soul is like a physical property, sort of like a factory.
This is like almost completely circular because it's like she's applying the soul to a physical. She's like thinking the soul is physical, and then she's saying it can't be physical, but then arguing that it can't be physical. Like it's a kind of a weird circular argument here that it's confusing me honestly, because it's like no, the soul doesn't have to take ion tweezers and move it across the cell brain at all.
Like to see, now that you mentioned this David Chalmers guy, I'd like to see him debate her.
He would wreck her. Just
her. All right. So my argument against the existence of the soul is, the soul is like a factory, there's no way it could micromanage all these things. I accept that. I accept all of the.
Yeah, no, he's a cognitive scientist too. So all of what she's saying, he actually deals with. Like,
he's not a philosopher. Ooh,
well,
we should get
he's
him
a
to debate
philosopher.
Daniel. That's an idea for the show. We should get Daniel Dennett on here versus David Chalmers.
Bro, that debate would blow up. But no, let's continue with this. But this is just seriously confusing me.
To have that as an expectation. So where would any sort of external influence inject itself into what I see as me and the experience of me, which requires all of those things to happen?
The experience of you is what isn't like what? Okay.
That's what the duelist is trying to say.
Yeah, they're saying the experience of you. There would be no experience of you if everything was like physical. That's literally the dualist point.
Yeah, I think it's called the argument from, not the argument from knowledge, but the argument from the immateriality of mental processes, I think is what it's called, where, like, I'll have to find it again. See, this is why I should have been reading on the philosophy of mind way before this.
Right. This is confusing me. It's so bad, honestly. No offense to her, it's just terrible.
And in a very specific physical arrangement, material arrangement.
What the heck?
I don't know. It's a commercial.
Wait a minute.
As a counter to that, you could just say, like,
yeah, cut that out. Cut that out of the stream.
It was like 2 seconds, so I'm not too worried.
Magic.
What?
And you could just have
Wait, hold on. Let me go back. What did she just say? Did she just say you could have magic do it?
As a counter to that, you could just say, like, I mean, this might sound a bit rubbish, but like magic could do it. And you could just have
What? No. What?
I think she's saying that you could have magic as an explanation
for
conscious experiences.
Then that would be like some type of like brain in the vat type weirdness. Like, what? No.
Like the electrons move.
Sir.
Something we don't understand.
How much time do we got left?
That's not magic though.
How much time do we have left?
Only like 2 minutes.
Okay.
Oh no, we're frozen.
No, you have it. I can see you. Uh-oh. Now she's frozen on my end.
Okay. Back.
You're back. I see you.
So I was just saying, like, we could just say, like, there was, like, just call it magic, and it can, like, control the electrons or, like, subatomic particles, and it does it in a way which causes certain...
But what?
Chemicals to tend to bunch in certain places, whatever. But, like, I mean, there could be just something which does that at some kind of scale that we don't understand. But what my then counter-argument against that would be, like you were talking about on the micro level as opposed to the macro level, but we can also see how, like, the conscience and, like, the self changes on a macro scale. If I cut a chunk of your brain out, it turns you into a different person. Like,
right, so she's talking about like the split brain experiment, where when they split the brain in half, it changed them into 2 different people, right? That is an issue for some type of Cartesian dualism. It's a big issue, actually, a huge issue, but that doesn't challenge something like David Chalmers' view of dualism. He's just going to accept, well, consciousness arises from physical, or emerges from physical properties, right? So if you split the brain in half, you're going to get 2 separate souls, basically. So I think again, it doesn't really.
Yeah, even with that, I have to. You're going to have to send me some papers on this. And I'll have to look over those.
I'm trying to keep like not very technical. I'm trying to keep a lot of the technicality out, but a lot of it does because it's just they're arguing against something. They're trying to argue universally against something,
But
even
they're only
though
arguing against a particular viewpoint.
yeah.
It-
So like they're like, well, we don't believe in supernatural souls. Well, you don't. First off, I hate the definition of supernatural. Second, you don't necessarily have to believe in gods to believe in a soul. And third, you didn't disprove the soul; you just proved like a Cartesian version of it. So it's weird.
Yeah. By the way, if you guys haven't realized, this is like JC's like bread and butter is consciousness, and I like just like got like started talking about it and reading about it like this week. So I'm trying to hang in. I'm trying to hang in here.
Well, I'm not. I'm trying to like not. It gets me excited, but at the same time, I would like to someday do a better video than this because this just really was terrible.
Bits of your brain that we know that can change like your self-awareness or how you react to things or everything about your consciousness. It can change how you actually think. And really, if there is something else other than your physical brain, then there should be some part of you which we can't change by cutting into the brain.
But you don't. Okay, I would also argue right there is also not true. You don't change the subjective experience of existence, right? Even if you cut out half the brain and they both have two different personalities, they still both believe they exist, right? So there is a part of consciousness that doesn't change no matter what you do to it until like, obviously if you die, you could argue that consciousness goes away. But again, there is a part of consciousness that stays the same. It's not like one half believes it doesn't, like has no concept of its existence, and the other half, has a concept of its existence. They both believe they exist, and they both have a concept of their existence. It's just one has a different personality. One's happier and one's not. Like, I would say that there still remains a certain mediation between the two, where consciousness does stay the same on a certain level.
Well, speaking of that, which end of the spectrum are you on about consciousness? Do you think it's suspended after
death?
Yeah.
I'm like agnostic on the issue. Since I'm like an idealist, I lean more towards like we have a concept of existence after death, but I don't think it's the same way as we do now. Like,
do you think it could be something? You think it could be something like Elon Musk's idea that like we're a computer or something like that?
I think it could be some type of like I think when we die, we have a concept of existence, but we don't necessarily have a personality to go along with that. So it's not like I'm still going to be Jackson. I'm just going to exist and have a concept of existence, right? So I think
you'll be sort of conscious then of your
I'll be
decisions.
conscious in the sense that I believe I exist, but I don't think I'd have like a type of personality to go along with that. But that's also another video.
Jackson Houghton, am existent.
Yeah.
I, Daniel Dennett, am a brain.
I'm a brain in a vat.
And that would be like evidence there's something else. So for example, like I don't know, if we break up some characteristics and we could say like there's a part of your brain which controls how angry you get. And perhaps you're more knowledgeable on this. But I know that there is a part of the brain which restrains how angry you get and how you react to things. You can have a brain injury, which means you're much quicker to anger, and then you're in a sense a different person. If we just suddenly change that, and you suddenly have no longer restraint. But perhaps there's like another emotion that you have, like love, and it turns out that it doesn't matter which individual part of your brain we get rid of, or any combination of, that just never changes. And that would be quite good evidence for me that there was something else other than your brain. But I mean, as far as we know, that's not true.
I don't see an issue there either.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the exact.
I mean, I kind of agree that would be good evidence for it, but I don't think that it's a
That'd be good evidence for like Cartesian dualism, not necessarily like
property.
Yeah, no, I forget it was an article I read, and this girl, she was born without like any sensory perception at all. Like she couldn't hear, she couldn't see, she couldn't smell, she couldn't feel, she couldn't do any of that. But she still had a concept of she existed. Still had a concept of relationships, and she had a concept of building trust and having a phenomenal, like, just she was still able to function on that level of just acknowledgement of existence.
She just couldn't talk to people. Couldn't. Well, actually, no. I'm pretty sure she could actually talk to people if they
She
did
could
something.
smile.
Yeah,
but
that's what
yeah, I think that this is just really, this is kind of a circular point where like it's assuming they're right, and then they like it's just weird.
It's like again, it's the Hawking and Miladinov thing. Maybe it's. I think I'm getting A Brief History of Time mixed up with The Grand Design, but whatever. Both are pretty. A Brief History of Time is a pretty good read, aside from that little quip about God not being able to cause anything because of time beginning.
Right.
But yeah, well, the best resource on consciousness. You ready?
What is it?
Roger Penrose.
He is pretty good.
I thought you didn't like him on that. No. That's Chris. Chris told me not to get his book. What is it? The Road to Reality.
Yeah, well, it's basically like pure mathematical physics, and so it's just like super hard to understand.
The dude's a genius, though.
He is.
It's just, his model sucks.
It does. Like, really bad. It sucks really bad.
Yeah. I don't know if that explains my position better. Oh, can you not hear us? Brenda,
I can hear you
still on the line.
I can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Good. So Hey, we hear you. Okay. Sorry, I guess we're having audio issues today. So I don't know if that helps, because I'm not sure if you had an objection or you were just unsure of what my position was, or that potentially I was misattributing my position philosophically, like labeling myself incorrectly.
I was simply curious about what you thought. That was all.
Oh,
you're
cool.
Well informed, and I would like to know, because you're somebody who is informed on this, and I was interested.
I mean, it'd be a stretch to necessarily call her informed on philosophy.
Yeah,
but
before we progress, I'd like to make sure that everybody understands that this is not meant for satire. This is not meant to try to, attack Shannon Q in any way. Like we said multiple times in the video, that we think that she's an intelligent person. We just think that she's got a couple of mix-ups on certain things.
Right, and she's attributing different things and different arguments as universal when they're not, and she's not understanding the full entire concept of what consciousness is. So this is not at all meant to make her, demean her and demean her intelligence. It's just to point out that, we shouldn't just accept things from certain people without actually doing our research. So somebody shouldn't go and watch this video and then think that all of dualism and all of non-materialistic views of consciousness is stupid, right? So I think this is not at all meant to be an attack on her personally or attack on anybody in the video. It's just meant to be pointing out that they were misinformed and misunderstanding a lot.
It's like the Hawking. I remember now. It is in A Brief History of Time, but it's on. I don't remember the page number, but it's his model with James Hartle, and where he uses that as some sort of I don't know if he would call it circular causation, but anyway, it's Hawking's mix-up of. Now, I'm not going to use the words David Bentley Hart's used because those are kind of insulting, and that would be that could definitely be satire. But it's the same scenario where he mixes up certain views of God's relation to the universe, and then he kind of makes it universally and says that therefore God does not exist, but it doesn't work that way because some views of God are completely different. Like Thomas, like Aquinas's view was that, or was perfectly compatible with an eternal universe. The same way that William Lane Craig's view of God is not compatible with an eternal universe. So
Yeah.
you get what I'm saying. There's different views, and you can't like if you were to make an argument that like the universe was eternal, and then you were to say that boom, therefore God doesn't exist. Like Aquinas's idea would still stand even if the universe was eternal, and so would Leibniz. Alexander Pruss's ideas would. Pretty much any classical theist from the past 500 years or so, a lot of their views would be completely compatible with the idea of an eternal universe.
Yeah, this is not at all. It's just it was a lot of misunderstanding, and it's a lot of just big stretches and big claims that they made that weren't necessarily true. So we just kind of want to throw that out there, that it's not at all meant to attack her. It's just meant to show that like you can't listen to absolutely everything you hear.
And you got to do. It seemed to me like she actually had attempted to do a lot of research on this, because a lot of the things that she was saying I didn't understand. I didn't understand, not in the way that like, the way that people like to call it word salad, but it was the way that like it was the information that she was talking about. I hadn't heard anything about it, so I think that's a bonus for her that she's at least. It seems at least like she's trying to. She's not just going and then she's not just going up and finding some random like website information and then saying that therefore this, like, she's not like the people that go on Wikipedia and like look at an article on there and then think they're an immediate expert on it.
Right. I mean, at least she attempted, and she knows a lot about the science. She's just not understanding that the science doesn't compete with the soul, right? Like the science doesn't disprove the soul. And I think that's just kind of the point that we were trying to make, is that her rebuttal against the soul and against that type of view of consciousness doesn't necessarily pack as much power as people thought it did, especially when you look at the comments. Now, obviously, the comments, it's just a terrible place to go to actually learn anything, but yeah.
Yeah, well, this has been a very interesting video. I think I'm gonna try to read more on consciousness, because I started looking at J.P. Moreland's article in the Black Wall, and it was definitely something very interesting to me.
Yeah, and it's just, I think we're going to wrap it up, but thank you everyone for coming and chatting and we had a larger audience than we've ever had. We had like 5 people, so that was a bonus.
Yeah, we had 2 comments in the live chat, so.
Oh no, we had more than 2.
Yeah, we had a lot. Spartan Theology commented twice, I think.
No, he let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. We had 20 comments. So
does Spartan Theology have a YouTube channel?
Yeah.
So then go subscribe to Spartan Theology's YouTube channel.
Yeah, go subscribe to Spartan Theology, and I think we're just gonna kind of leave it off here.